The pen trembled in my hand as I stared at the document that had just shattered the last illusion I held about my family. My name is Rachel Morris, but only Rachel when my mother needed something. 3 months ago, I emptied the savings I'd spent 7 years building. I wrote a check for $80 to save my parents' home from foreclosure. I thought I was securing their safety, preserving the house I grew up in, where every corner whispered of childhood and sacrifice. But what I found in their office drawer, dated just 2 weeks after my sacrifice, left me hollow. A fresh will, neatly printed, legally binding, and devastating. My name wasn't in it. Instead, every cent of their estate was to go to my younger brother, Ethan, and 2 cousins I barely spoke to. I had been cut out, intentionally. Erased, forgotten, rejected, not despite what I gave, but perhaps because of it. My phone buzzed again. "Rachel, darling," my mother's voice rang in the voicemail from earlier. "Saccharine as always. I just need a small favor." That's what she always called it. A favor, whether it was $5 or 5,000. But this time, something inside me cracked, because the ink on the page in front of me told the truth. To them, I was never their daughter. I was their safety net, their backup plan. And now, I was done. Growing up in a modest neighborhood outside of Minneapolis, I had always believed that if I worked hard enough, loved deeply enough, and gave selflessly, I would be seen, valued. My father, Douglas Morris, was an accountant obsessed with precision and control, who ran our home the same way he managed his spreadsheets. My mother, Joanne, was a part-time teacher with a full-time sense of martyrdom, constantly reminding us how much she'd sacrificed for the family. And Ethan, my younger brother by 4 years, was the golden child, the sensitive artist, the one who needed extra support, the one who never quite seemed to get it together. Praise in our household came with conditions. At 8, I brought home straight A's on my report card. My father simply asked why I didn't do the extra credit. In 6th grade, when I placed second in the science fair, my mother looked at me and sighed. "You should have tried harder, like that Peterson girl." Over time, I learned that love had to be earned through perfection. I became an overachiever, the kind of daughter who made Dean's List, led the debate team, volunteered on weekends, and still questioned if it was ever enough. When it came time for college, I wanted to major in psychology, fascinated by how people think and why they hurt each other. But my parents wanted business, something practical. My father had said. I applied for scholarships in secret and earned one. When I told them, expecting at least a flicker of pride, my mother's response was, "Is psychology even a real career?" My father called it a phase. Those 4 years were brutal. I worked 3 part-time jobs to survive: waitressing, tutoring, weekend retail. Meanwhile, my parents, fully capable of helping, chose to withhold support, on principle, because I had dared to choose my own path. Still, I kept giving. When Ethan needed help buying books for college, I sent money. When their basement flooded, I paid the plumber. When my father lost his job and their mortgage hung in the balance, I drained my emergency fund. And every time, they responded not with shame, but with expectation. It became routine. My mother didn't ask for money directly. She sighed heavily and let her voice tremble just enough. My father simply handed me numbers, as if I were their banker. Then came the kitchen remodel. Granite countertops, custom cabinets. 2 months after I bailed them out. It was a good investment, my father had said, noticing my silence during dinner. No mention of repayment, no recognition that my future had just been postponed for theirs. Later that year, when Ethan finished his master's program, they gave him a brand new MacBook. When I gently asked how they afforded it, my mother answered, "We'd been saving for his graduation," as if my years of sacrifice had never counted. Eventually, they asked me to co-sign a credit card, just for emergencies. Within months, they'd racked up charges from luxury boutiques, a lakeside resort, and fine dining. When I confronted them, my mother snapped, "How dare you treat us like children after everything we've done for you?" The night my father joked in front of the family that I was the ATM with no limit, I smiled tightly through the embarrassment and told myself, once again, that this is just what families do. That if I gave more, loved more, they'd change. But nothing changed. And when the foreclosure call came at nearly midnight, a breathless voicemail from my mother, my body reacted before my brain could. I didn't hesitate. I met with the bank, calculated the arrears, and knew it would take nearly all my savings to save their home. Even Michael, my partner of 2 years, begged me to reconsider. "They've taken enough from you," he said. "This is your life they're risking." But I couldn't bear the thought of them losing the house I grew up in. The same house where we celebrated birthdays, where I carved my name into the back porch rail, where I had once believed I was safe. So I gave them the money, $80, under one condition. It was a loan. I had the agreement written up, signed, and notarized. They promised transparency, regular repayments, and equal inheritance. Of course, they said, "You'll get it all back. Sweetheart, you'll even get the house one day." But 2 weeks later, I found the will. Not only had they failed to mention my name in the asset division, they had added a paragraph that deliberately excluded me. Ethan and our cousins were to inherit everything. And me? I didn't exist. I didn't cry that day. I sat in my father's office, hands numb, the will in my lap, and I finally saw things clearly. I was never their daughter in the way children deserve to be. I was their investment, their crutch, their emergency fund, and I was done being their solution. The days following the discovery of the will felt like a silent collapse. I went to work, I answered emails, I paid bills, but inside, everything felt suspended, like I was watching my life from the outside. The realization wasn't just that I'd been excluded, it was that I'd been deliberately used. The loan documents meant nothing to them. The promises were nothing but words, temporary appeasement to get what they wanted. And worst of all, they believed I would never walk away. That no matter how badly they treated me, I would always come back. For weeks, I tried to justify it. Maybe they didn't think clearly when they wrote the will. Maybe they just forgot. Maybe they were planning to tell me and hadn't gotten around to it. But each, maybe, was just a wall keeping me from the truth I already knew. This wasn't new. This had been my reality for years. As a child, my emotional needs were often dismissed unless they aligned with my parents' narrative. I learned early not to cry, because crying was drama. I learned not to speak up, because challenging them meant being labeled ungrateful. I learned to give, to perform, to be the daughter they could show off when convenient, and ignore when I didn't serve their agenda. But now, at 31, I had a name for it: financial and emotional abuse. I started researching online, reading personal accounts of adult children who had endured the same twisted form of love. Parents who manipulated guilt, held money over their kids' heads, or turned their children into providers, only to discard them when they were no longer useful. Every story hit too close. What haunted me most wasn't the money. It was how disposable I felt. The years I spent defending them to Michael, making excuses, brushing off red flags because they're my parents. The birthdays they missed, the calls they ignored until they needed help. The way my mother used her soft voice like a blade, always guilt, never gratitude. Michael, ever patient but quietly aching for me, had finally said it aloud. "Rach, it's not love if it only flows one way." I broke down that night. I cried until my chest hurt. Grief not just for the family I had, but for the one I had always wished for. I grieved the time I couldn't get back, the dreams I postponed, the parts of myself I silenced just to keep them comfortable. That night, I made a decision. I contacted an attorney, not to sue them, but to protect myself. We reviewed the loan agreement. It was valid, enforceable, and I could begin a formal repayment request. But that wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was writing the letter. It took me 3 days. 3 days to write a message to the people who raised me, explaining that I was no longer available as a financial backup, that I expected the loan to be honored, that I was no longer willing to play the role of the reliable one while being erased from their lives. I didn't insult them. I didn't attack. But for the first time, I told the truth. Then I sent it. The response came 2 days later. My father called first, furious. "How dare you threaten us with legal action? We're your parents." His voice cracked, not with shame, but rage. I didn't flinch. "I asked you to respect a contract you signed," I said calmly. "This isn't revenge. This is accountability." Then my mother called, crying, of course, saying I was breaking the family apart, that Ethan was just more in need, and that I'd never understood how hard it had been for them. I didn't respond. That night, I blocked both their numbers. It wasn't spite, it was survival. In the weeks that followed, I began to reclaim my life, one boundary at a time. I set up a separate email for legal matters and gave it to my attorney. I started therapy with a trauma-informed counselor who specialized in family estrangement. And for the first time, I began to define love not by loyalty, but by mutual respect. I still missed them, but I missed the idea of them more than the reality. And slowly, I started to see something that had always been there, waiting. Peace. Not perfection, not closure, but peace. The kind that comes when you stop trying to prove your worth to people determined not to see it. It's strange how silence can be healing. For the first time in years, my phone didn't light up with demands, guilt-laced questions, or passive-aggressive reminders of everything I owed. And in that silence, I could finally hear myself think. I wasn't anyone's savior anymore, not their fixer, not their fallback plan. I was just Rachel, and for once, that was enough. Michael was the first to notice the change. One Sunday morning, as we sat on the porch drinking coffee, he looked over and said, "You're breathing differently, like you've stopped holding your breath." He was right. Letting go of my parents wasn't just about ending a relationship. It was about reclaiming the years I had spent chasing a version of love that never really existed. It was about looking in the mirror and not seeing a failure or a disappointment, but a survivor. I threw myself into therapy, not to fix myself, because I was never broken, but to understand why I kept believing I was. Dr. Patel, my therapist, helped me unpack decades of emotional conditioning. We talked about gaslighting, about how praise had always been transactional in my home, about how guilt had become a leash around my neck. She asked questions no one had dared to ask before. What would your life look like if you stopped managing everyone else's happiness? I didn't know, but I wanted to find out. So I started making space. I deleted voicemails I used to replay for meaning. I removed my parents from emergency contact forms. I stopped checking Ethan's social media. Stopped wondering if he felt remorse for being handed everything while I carried the weight. Instead, I focused on building something new. I'd always dreamed of starting a nonprofit, an organization for young women navigating toxic family dynamics, especially in households where emotional manipulation was masked as cultural duty or just the way we do things. For years, I'd put that dream on hold because I believed I wasn't ready. Or worse, that I didn't deserve to build something of my own. But now, I was ready. With Michael's support and the money I had once planned to use for a down payment, before I gave it away, I launched Reclaim, the foundation for daughters who choose themselves. We offered free therapy scholarships, legal workshops on financial abuse, and small grants for women who had been cut off for saying no. At first, it was just me and a laptop in my apartment. But word spread. Emails poured in from women like me, teachers, engineers, first-gen college grads, even stay-at-home moms, who had spent years being told they were selfish for drawing boundaries, or ungrateful for demanding respect. Some told me I had saved their lives. That shook me, because for so long, I believed my story was small, quiet, unremarkable, but pain, I learned, becomes powerful when it's shared with purpose. And slowly, the weight I carried began to feel less like a burden and more like a foundation. My parents? They didn't reach out again. But I heard through a distant cousin that they had started telling people I had distanced myself because I was too busy with my career. I laughed when I heard that, not in bitterness, but in recognition. They were rewriting the narrative, as always, and for the first time, I didn't care, because I was no longer trying to control how they saw me. I was writing my own story now. Michael and I bought a modest townhome, just outside the city. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. Every corner felt like a reclamation. The bookshelf was lined with books I loved, not ones my parents approved of. The kitchen had mismatched mugs we picked up on road trips, not pristine china for display. And the walls, bare at first, soon held art from women whose stories I had helped amplify. I remember one night, I stood barefoot in our little living room, watching the rain tap against the windows, and whispered out loud, "I'm safe. Not rich, not finished, not perfect. Just safe." That was everything. By the end of the second year, Reclaim had outgrown my apartment. We moved into a shared community space downtown, just a small suite above a bookstore, but it felt monumental. Every chair, every lamp, every scuff on the hardwood floor felt earned, like a scar that proved we had survived something. Our small team, 3 full-time, 4 part-time, was made up entirely of women who had lived it. Not just read about toxic family patterns, but endured them, escaped them, and now, they were guiding others to do the same. We didn't use the word estranged as a label. We called ourselves daughters who chose clarity over chaos. Workshops on financial boundaries quickly became our most attended programs. Women arrived nervous, often whispering, "I don't know if this counts as abuse." By the end, they were nodding, crying, hugging strangers who suddenly felt like sisters. We held storytelling nights, truth without permission. We called them. The first one I hosted, I told my full story out loud for the first time. The ATM jokes, the will, the moment I blocked their numbers. It wasn't polished. My voice cracked halfway through. But when I finished, the room stood silent, holding space, and then, they clapped, not because the story was extraordinary, but because it was familiar. Later, a woman in her 60s, with graying braids and trembling hands, approached me and said, "I wish I had met you 30 years ago. But I'm here now, and it's not too late." That night, I cried in the parking lot. But they were tears of freedom. The media eventually found us. At first, I was hesitant. I didn't want to be a face of anything. But then came an invitation from a podcast I respected, a show about women rewriting inherited legacies. I agreed. 1 hour turned into 2. And within days of airing, our inbox flooded. Messages from Texas, Georgia, even Canada. One said, "My mom used my college fund for my brother's wedding. I thought I was crazy for being upset. Until I heard you." Another, "You gave me permission to stop bleeding for people who never offered me a band-aid." I kept every message, printed them, read them on hard days. Michael, always steady, watched the transformation with pride. One night over dinner, he said, "You turned pain into a place people can rest in." That stuck with me. We applied for a grant from a women's leadership foundation. I didn't expect to get it, but we did. $250 over 2 years. That money changed everything. We hired therapists, paid honorariums for speakers, launched a scholarship fund for daughters who were cut off financially after choosing independence. I named the fund, the Quiet Daughters Grant, because we were always the quiet ones. The ones who never made a scene, who carried guilt in our bones, and who were finally learning how to speak. Around that time, I received an unexpected email. It was from my brother, Ethan. The subject line read, "I need to talk." I stared at it for 10 minutes. When I finally opened it, the message was short. He'd found out about the will. He'd had no idea. He was sorry. He wanted to meet. I didn't respond right away. It took me 2 weeks. And when I did, I told him the truth. "I don't know if I'm ready. But I'm willing to start with a conversation. No expectations, no promises, just honesty." We met at a small diner off the interstate. It was awkward. He fumbled his words. I guarded mine. But something surprising happened. He listened. He didn't defend our parents. He didn't try to rewrite the story. He just said, "You didn't deserve any of that. I wish I had stood up for you." I realized then, healing doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it just means being seen by someone who used to look away. Today, Reclaim serves over 2,000 women a year. And every time I stand in that office, every time I watch someone take their first trembling step toward freedom, I remember the Rachel who thought silence was survival, who thought family meant debt, who thought love was something you earned by disappearing. She was wrong. And now, she's free. There's a moment, quiet and unglamorous, when you realize you don't need an apology to heal. That moment came for me not with a dramatic confrontation, but in a small room filled with other women who, like me, were done bleeding for people who never once handed us a bandage. I used to believe loyalty meant endurance, that to be a good daughter, I had to tolerate everything, even being erased. But now I know the truth. Love without respect isn't love. It's control, and no legacy, no inheritance, no last name, is worth your sanity, your peace, or your voice. I still walk past families laughing in restaurants and feel a quiet ache. I won't lie, it stings. But I also feel something else now, freedom. The kind that comes when you choose yourself, even when no one else does. Speech balloon. Have you ever had to walk away from the people who raised you just to become the person you were meant to be? Your story matters. Share it in the comments. Your truth could be someone else's turning point. Pushpin. And if this story spoke to you, don't just scroll past. Subscribe to Family Revenge for more true stories of healing, courage, and quiet rebellion. Because the next story might be yours, and this time, you get to tell it on your terms.